As an understanding husband, always be making the most of your time, Ephesians 5:16. That wife felt understood, at least in part. Be aware, however, that a woman's need to feel you understand is insatiable. It will take constant effort on your part, and while you can never do it perfectly, every effort you make will tell her, "I love you." This husband's letter sums it up beautifully. It has always been one of my goals to provide my wife with a safe environment in which she can be free to be the person God made her to be, and I hope that this is happening. She now freely identifies herself as someone who, just a couple of years ago, was not happy but has put that behind her. I hope that I am understanding her better and being a better friend to her. We have a lot of challenges each week raising 4 kids, but we are a team, and I feel like we are working through all of it together, with God's active presence and help. She'll feel you're trying to understand her when you listen and can repeat back what she said. You don't try to fix her problems, unless she specifically asks for a solution. You try to identify her feelings. You never dismiss her feelings, no matter how illogical they may seem to you. You say, "I appreciate your sharing that with me." You don't interrupt her when she's trying to tell you how she feels. You apologize and admit you were wrong. You cut her some slack during her monthly cycle. You see something that needs to be done and you do it without a lot of hassle. You express appreciation for all she does. "Honey, I could never do your job." You pray with her and for her. Chapter 12. Peacemaking. She wants you to say, "I'm sorry." While in graduate school, I took a class that involved quite a bit of discussion of conceptual frameworks for certain ideas. There were only 2 or 3 of us men in the class, the rest were women, and all of them were feminists. One day the word connectivity came up for discussion. I noticed that the women literally brightened up, and a surge of energy seemed to run through the room. I addressed a question to the ladies: "What is connectivity to you?" They paused. They rummaged about a bit and then said things like, "Well, it's to connect. To be one. To be soulmates." That was good for a start, but I wanted to know more. Could you give me a working definition of this? After all, we're all working on PhDs here. We need to be able to discuss and define this in specific terms. None of the women could. They admitted, "We can't. We just know when it is present and we know when it's not." "I see," I said. Of course, I didn't see, but we had to move on to the next concept. I never forgot that discussion, and I continued to work on defining connectivity as I entered the pastorate and especially as I began counseling married couples. Eventually, I came to a much better understanding of connectivity as I created the COUPLE acronym. As we have already seen in these chapters, there are many sides to connectivity. We have already looked at closeness, openness, and understanding. Obviously, all of these have a bearing on how connected a wife feels with her husband. There is a 4th side to connectivity that we need to look at very carefully: peacemaking. In some ways, it might be most important. If there is a rift, a conflict, even a sense of tension, you and your wife are not fully at peace, and, therefore, you can't really feel connected. Without peace in your relationship, she doesn't feel close, she doesn't feel you're open, and she certainly thinks you don't understand. All this can be traced back to the tension or rift that has come between you. Along with research done by academics on connectivity, I also studied the scriptures and came upon a paradox. I learned that God intended for some conflict to exist in a marriage, see 1 Corinthians 7, 3-4. Even secular research showed that the best marriage relationships have some conflict. It's almost as if you need a degree of conflict to keep the passion there. The sequence seems to have the couple experience a misunderstanding, they have a minor argument, a bump of some kind. But as they work through this conflict, they deepen their understanding of each other and value and appreciate one another all the more as they reconcile the conflict. If you are angry with your wife, even for a brief moment, she is grieved in spirit and rejected and needs reassurance that you love her, Isaiah 54, 5-8. Obviously, when the sparks fly and a couple has a conflict, serious or minor, there is a risk. It can go one of 2 ways. Sparks can cause a controllable fire that heats the house and makes things warm and comfortable. Or sparks can set a wildfire that burns the house down. All married couples must realize that the sparks are going to be there. The question is, how will you control them? I talked with one husband who confessed that he tried to motivate his wife to show him some respect by acting very unlovingly. He distanced himself from her. He closed off his spirit in anger. He disregarded her feelings. He argued his points to win and never reconciled. In short, he never made peace with her. He admitted to me, "I thought if I did all that, she'd start showing me a little more respect." Then he'd put his head down on the table in despair and said, "But she divorced me. Until now I didn't know why." Husband and wife can work it out. As you have conflict, your wife will probably recognize it much sooner than you do. She can feel rejected by you in a way that you do not feel rejected by her. See Isaiah 54:6-1. Consequently, she wants to have things resolved between the two of you, and she will move toward you to get this done. As you go head to head and solve the problem, you become heart to heart. This is very precious to her. It's a very powerful thing for your wife when she knows that the two of you are at peace. Don't refuse to make peace by running from conflict with your spouse. Conflict is not a sign you have a bad marriage. In fact, the Bible says that those who marry will have trouble. 1 Corinthians 7:28. What kind of trouble did Paul have in mind? Earlier in the chapter, he lays down an excellent principle for dealing with conflict in marriage. The husband must fulfill his duty to his wife, and likewise also the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does, and likewise also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. 1 Corinthians 7:3-4. In this passage Paul is giving advice to married couples in the church at Corinth. It was not uncommon in the first century for some believers to get the idea that a good Christian would abstain from sex completely, and apparently that was what was going on at Corinth. To correct this error, Paul encourages sexual relations between husband and wife, because this is the way not to fall into temptation and immorality outside of marriage. CV 5. It seems a little odd, however, when Paul says that the wife doesn't have authority over her body and the husband does, and the husband doesn't have authority over his body and the wife does. What does Paul mean? I believe he is laying out one of the great principles of the New Testament. Because you have equal but differing needs, you will experience conflict. But you can work this out as partners. The husband should not act independently from his wife, and the wife should not act independently from her husband. A husband and wife should and can act together. Point 2. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Ephesians 5:21 Niv. It is as if God said, "I'm going to allow for tension to exist in your marriage. I intend for you to work this out, because as you work out your tensions, your relationship is going to deepen and then deepen some more, and you're going to continue to go through life working it out, back and forth, back and forth." My wife is always getting historical. As I talked with one man about his marriage, he told me that every time he and his wife got into a fight, she would get historical. To be sure I understood, I asked him if he actually meant hysterical. He said, "No, historical. She keeps dredging everything up from the past." Many wives are very good at getting historical. That's why it doesn't do a husband a lot of good to try to end a conflict by saying, "Let's just drop it." That is not how she thinks, and she will not drop it. She may let it go for the moment, but she will remember, and eventually she will start rehearsing history for her husband again. Almost every husband I have ever talked with can share stories about his wife's seemingly limitless capacity to remember who said what, where it happened, who was wearing what, etc. Your wife is wired to get historical, to bring things up that you've totally forgotten, to go full circle and get them resolved. She's dredging them up so she can clear the air and feel love in the relationship. And you, the hapless husband who stands bewildered before her seemingly superhuman memory, will have to come to the point where you accept that this is her integrated personality in action and that she can't just drop it. Whenever she gets historical, she is trying to reconcile with you. She wants you to be open with her, and she's trying to encourage understanding and peace between you. She wants to be sure you aren't angry with her so that she can feel loved. She is not trying to provoke you, although it may sound that way as she delivers her historical diatribe. Husbands have a hard time believing this. The fellow who told me his wife often got historical was more than skeptical when I tried to explain that she was just trying to increase feelings of love between them. "No way," he said in bewilderment. But it's true because this is how a woman's mind works. During a conflict, the woman's approach to solving that conflict is very different from how the man resolves conflict. As discussed in Chapter 4, two women who are good friends will get into a serious disagreement, but later, perhaps the next day or perhaps in half an hour, they will resolve it as each one states her side. They get it all out on the table and finally ask each other for forgiveness. The problem is that the typical wife will go home and try to use this same approach to resolving conflict with her husband. But it doesn't work. Why? Because the typical male resolves conflict without a lot of discussion, sharing of feelings, or apologies. Some men might apologize to one another, but as a rule it's just sort of taken for granted that they will just drop it, and they do. So when a husband is approached by a wife who wants to resolve a conflict by sharing feelings and coming, full circle, to a resolution, he balks. Halfway around her circle the husband says, "Drop it. Just forget it. It's over with." But the problem with that is, she won't believe him. In her mind, she knows it's not over. She knows she will bring it up again because she's still sitting on the whole thing. She is so dominated by the drive to love that it is difficult for her to believe that her husband could process it any other way than she processes it. Here's what happens. When you shut down a discussion by saying, "Just drop it," your wife is likely to think you're still secretly angry with her and that this thing is really unresolved. Without any resolution, it will be very difficult for her to be happy. This letter catches the frustration a wife can have. Inside I continue to die, because I am so unaware of how to let the Lord restore this relationship. My husband has told me on more than one occasion that we are unusual in our love for each other. Most people do not know the intimacy we have at times, but the patterns of arguments, and not ever really feeling reconciled are taking a toll on me. For any husband who wants fewer ongoing arguments, the path to peace is plain. He must learn to simply say, "Honey, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? I did not mean to do that." Do this, even if in your mind most of the guilt or blame is hers. The percentage of guilt is not the issue. As always, the real issue is love and respect. Why it's hard for a man to say, "I'm sorry." As a husband, I want to share with all husbands that I understand why it's hard to say, "I'm sorry." When a woman says, "I'm sorry," to her it's an increase of love. But when a man says, "I'm sorry," he fears that he will lose respect. This is especially true if he says he's sorry for something and then his wife brings it up again because she isn't convinced he means it. She simply thinks the issue is not resolved and it must be discussed some more, but he thinks she has just violated his honor code. For him, going over it again is a lot more serious. To sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kindhearted, and humble in spirit. 1 Peter 3:8. It is easy enough, of course, to just accuse the male of being proud. I am not saying that there is not some element of pride involved here. But mixed in with male pride is a deep sense of honor and wanting respect. To all husbands I want to say, I've been there. I have had to push through and say to Sarah, "I'm sorry. I was wrong." And when I finally convinced her that I meant it, it healed her spirit. Those simple words put her at peace. A wife can be extremely upset, but if a husband humbly expresses sorrow for what he did, she melts. I don't think very many men grasp this. A wife wrote me about a fight she had with her husband earlier in the evening. It was silly. In fact, at one point they had talked about kissing and they ended up fighting. She went to bed, and he came later. I laid there for a while and then out of the blue he said facing the wall, "I'm sorry, and if you still want that kiss, you can have it." And I fell in love with him all over again. Needless to say, we weren't fighting anymore. As a husband, hear this woman's language, I fell in love with him all over again. A wife has a wide range of emotions, highs and lows. You can energize her toward the high end of the spectrum by doing just what this husband did. A short course on peacemaking. Still not sure about how to make peace with your wife? Following are some good techniques and principles, which correlate with Scripture. First, have absolute confidence in the power of your loving demeanor. To paraphrase Proverbs 15:1, a gentle, loving answer turns away wrath, especially your wife's. When you show a loving demeanor during a conflict of any kind, you are likely to touch the deepest part of her heart. Your loving attitude triggers something within her heart as a woman. God made her this way. Bottom line, she reciprocates. A husband cannot outgive a good-willed wife. But when you give in, be sure you mean it. If she detects insincerity on your part, you're probably due for another spin on the crazy cycle, see page 5. If possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men, Romans 12:18. Granted, a husband can ask, what if I keep loving and keep giving in and still feel disrespected? What should I do? At this point you have earned the right to say, I am seeking to give in to you and to be loving, but I am feeling disrespected. What am I saying to you that is unloving? Good-willed women tend to respond to reasonable, loving, honest requests and will seek ways to be more deferential. If your wife did not see it the first time, she will very likely see it the second time. Second, you will make peace with her when you don't blame her but, instead, confess your part of the blame, see James 5:16. I have said it already, but I repeat for emphasis, admit when you were wrong and apologize by saying, I'm sorry. That is a big turn on for a woman, but an even bigger turn on is to add, I think I really understand your feelings and why you react as you do. Will you forgive me? One more thing about confessing. Your motive should never be to confess so she will admit she was wrong, too, but often that is exactly what happens. Women are wired for equality. For example, she doesn't like feeling inferior or in the wrong, but neither does she want you to feel you're inferior or in the wrong. After you confess, my prediction is that she will quickly say, it's not all your fault. Actually, it's me too. In fact, it may be more me. I am sorry for what I did. Will you forgive me? She will meet you halfway almost every time. This is peacemaking in a woman's world. Put yourselves under God's mighty hand. Then He will honor you at the right time. 1 Peter 5:6 Nerve. Some men think, why bother with all this, I'm sorry, stuff. They're just words. You must understand that words are very powerful to your wife. Remember, although she may not be consciously thinking it, you are the Christ figure to her. God has instilled that in her. If you utter sincere words of apology, forgiveness, and love, she will trust those words and trust you. It can heal the whole thing, and you will be joined together, in a sense, as soulmates, no longer two, but one, see Matthew 19:6. You will experience the harmony and connectivity that God intended for marriage. Point 3. Also see Appendix A and B. Peacemaking can be difficult, but it is always worth it. It's ironic that a lot of men work out in the weight room, trying to make themselves look like Mr. Universe because they think that women get turned on to a hard body the way men are turned on to a female in a bikini. But it doesn't work that way. What turns her on is personality. Oddly enough, one of the things that really turns her on is saying in genuine humility, I am sorry. Please forgive me. This touches her spirit so much that she may want to grab your hand and drag you to the bedroom. Now that seems like a pretty good deal worth any possible loss of respect. I'm not saying it works for every husband, but it has been known to work for many. I had a man come up to me after one of our marriage conference sessions and say, you know, this saying, I'm sorry, really works. This week I've said, I'm sorry, 84 times. She'll feel at peace with you when you let her vent her frustrations and hurts and don't get angry and close her off. You admit you were wrong and apologize by saying, I'm sorry. Will you forgive me? You understand her natural desire to negotiate, compromise, and defer, and you meet her halfway. You try to keep your relationship up to date, resolving the unresolved and never saying, forget it. You forgive her for any wrongs she confesses. You never nurse bitterness and always reassure her of your love. You pray with her after a hurtful time. Chapter 13. Loyalty. She needs to know you're committed. It happens in almost every marriage. Wanting reassurance about his love, she asks, how much do you love me? Will you love me when I'm old and gray? If I'm an invalid? What if I get Alzheimer's? There are two ways a husband can go with this question. The wrong way leads straight back to the crazy cycle, and it involves having a little fun at your wife's expense. You're just kidding, of course, so you say, what's the matter? Afraid I'll trade you in for a new model. Don't be silly, I plan to keep you around. At least for a while. A wife may know that her husband is just kidding when he says things like this, but the big, dumb buck is stepping on her air hose, nonetheless. When she asks, do you love me? She's not asking for information, she's asking for reassurance. A woman always likes to hear her husband exclaim, you alone are, my love, Song of Solomon 2:10 KJV. The much smarter and wiser answer to her question is, of course I love you, and we are going to get old and gray together. Then she'll probably ask, why? Or, what is it that you love about me? She wants to draw this out of you because reassurance of your love energizes her. A wife must have reassurance. As one wife writes, we have a wonderful marriage and friendship, yet we find ourselves on the crazy cycle in our hectic lives, and the info we gained at your conference has given us a new understanding of one another. I had been trying to explain the times when I felt emotionally disconnected from him. Now he finally understands. We are able to talk now, and when I say I feel disconnected, he says, I am sorry and I don't want you to feel that way. We both walked away with a feeling of confidence knowing that we both have a commitment to the Lord first and then to each other. We feel very lucky and blessed. I guess I just feel like I have a renewed relationship with my husband. She's a one-man woman, and he's. Your wife knows she's a one-man woman, that she's committed to you, but she may wonder at times if you are a one-woman man. It's perfectly natural for a wife to think this, particularly when she sees her husband being attracted by some beautiful female walking by her on TV. She takes this as a possibility that he might be unfaithful to her. To be candid, she is insecure in this area and she needs reassurance, not jokes and teasing. Every woman wants her husband to be faithful to his wife, Titus 1:6 Nerve. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Suppose your wife came home and said, do you know that Dave Smith down the street just got his 3rd promotion? Well, my good friend, Marge, works in his office and she says people stop at his desk all the time to get counsel. The word is that he's a real man's man. You know he runs marathons, and lifts weights at his health club. He's making excellent money and spends a lot of it on his wife and kids. When are you going to start working out and getting rid of that potbelly? And when is your next promotion coming up? We could sure use some more money around here. Now, that speech is more than overstated, but you get the idea. If your wife said anything along those lines, it wouldn't make you feel good. In fact, depending on the kind of day or week you've had, you might be devastated. It's a swimsuit issue world. Have you ever thought about how difficult it is for a wife in today's sex-happy, pornography-riddled, swimsuit issue world? The way in which she looks at that world through her pink sunglasses is much different than the way you look at it through your blue ones. That is why Job had the right idea. I made an agreement with my eyes. I promised not to look at another woman with sexual longing. Job 3:11 Nerve. Job recognized that sinful people are destroyed. Trouble comes to those who do what is wrong. Job 31:3 Nerve. Job understood the impact of his actions, not only on his spiritual life but also on his relationship to his wife. The phrase, drink water from your own well, Proverbs 5:15 Nerve means be faithful to your own wife. All husbands might learn from Job at this point. When a woman senses that her husband has made a covenant with God and that he's trying to make Jesus the Lord of his life in every area, including his marriage, she feels more secure. When she is assured of her husband's love and loyalty, she is energized and motivated. This is the way God has made her, and this is why the covenant of marriage is based upon loyalty, until death do you part. Your wife feels so deeply what the lover in Song of Solomon expressed. Keep me close to yourself like the ring on your finger. 8:6 Nerve. The custom of giving each other a ring during your wedding ceremony captures the idea behind this verse. And, oh, the symbolism of that ring to a woman. The ring tells her she is loved and no longer alone. There is one person in the world who will be loyal to her, for life, not until divorce do you part. Many men do not wear wedding rings because of the kind of job they do, because they engage in sports, or because they have put on a few pounds through the years and the ring no longer fits. But a ring that no longer fits can be enlarged, or you can purchase another one for a few dollars. Rings don't cost that much, and even if you have to take it off now and then while at work or playing a game, you can always slip it right back on. A wedding ring is a sign of loyalty. No husband should leave home without one. And while you are sure to wear a wedding ring, also be sure to never bring up the D word, even in jest. The word divorce does not make your wife feel secure, no matter what the context. Why start slipping back toward the crazy cycle? Do everything you can to let your wife know you are committed to her for as long as you both shall live. Are you being as loyal as you could be? Don't break your promise to the wife you married when you were young. I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel, Malachi 2:15-16 Nerve. Malachi 2:14-15 is a helpful reminder of how God feels about marital loyalty. In this passage the prophet is confronting the Israelites for breaking their marriage bonds rather freely. Divorce was rampant, and that's why Malachi said that, "The Lord has been a witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and wife by covenant. Take heed then to your spirit, and let no one deal treacherously against the wife of your youth." At this point you may be saying, "Emerson, aren't you pushing it a little bit? I may need some help with being as loving as I should be, but I'm not dealing treacherously with my wife." Quote, "I'm not saying that you or any other good-willed husband are being treacherous toward your wife." This passage from Malachi, however, is a good reminder to do some self-evaluation. What is going on in your spirit? What are you feeling for your wife? Are you being open and understanding? Are you being as loyal to her as you could be? It's no coincidence that the very first words Malachi uses as he goes on to verse 16 are, "For I hate divorce," says the Lord, the God of Israel. Malachi is describing a situation that began with the crazy cycle. The Israelites knew nothing about that term, but they were on the crazy cycle nonetheless. That's why I'm urging you to stay open and on the energizing cycle, see page 115, in order to avoid all the craziness you can. Remember, without love, she reacts. And a big part of being loving is to be loyal in every way. Robertson McQuilkin kept his promise. One of the finest examples of a loyal husband I have found is the story of Robertson McQuilkin, who left his position as president of Columbia Bible College and Seminary after 22 years because his wife had developed Alzheimer's disease. The disease had progressed to the point where his wife simply could not stand having him gone, even for a few hours. She would actually think he was lost, and would go in search of him after he left home for work. Many claim to have love that never fails, but who can find a faithful man? Proverbs 20:6 Nerve. It was clear to McQuilkin that his wife now needed him full time. His decision was difficult, but in a way it was simple. He said, "The decision was made in a way 42 years ago when I promised to care for Muriel in sickness and in health, till death do us part." McQuilkin went on to say that he wanted to be a man of his word, and he also wanted to be fair. His wife had cared for him sacrificially during all of those 42 years, and if he cared for her for the next 40 years, he still would not be out of her debt. All of you should honor marriage. You should keep the marriage bed pure, Hebrews 13:4 Nerve. For McQuilkin, this simple decision was the only option for him, but there was more to it than just keeping a promise and being fair. "As I watch her brave descent into oblivion, Muriel is the joy of my life," he said. "Daily I discern new manifestations of the kind of person she is, the wife I always loved." 3. McQuilkin wrote a book about his experience, A Promise Kept, and in it he mentioned how startled he was by the response to his resignation as president of Columbia Bible College and Seminary to care for his wife. Husbands and wives renewed marriage vows. Pastors told his story during sermons. It was all a mystery to him until a distinguished oncologist, who dealt constantly with dying people, told him, "Almost all women stand by their men, very few men stand by their women." Why you should be especially good to your daughters. That all women stand by their men and few men stand by their women is obviously a generalization. There are always exceptions, and Robertson McQuilkin is an incredible example. But the reasoning behind this rule of thumb is that women are much more the natural caretakers than men. There is an old saying, "Be good to your sons, but be especially good to your daughters." Why? Because if you become a widower and infirm in your old age, it is your daughter who will do everything in her power to convince her own husband to move into the area where you live so she can be near you to take care of you. This kind of loyalty is part of a woman's spirit. When your wife becomes a bit insecure and moves toward you with questions about how much you love her or why you love her or if you will ever leave her, you might feel it's some kind of trap. You may think you're being set up so she can condemn you and show you disrespect if you hesitate with your answer. But that's not it at all. She moves toward you in that fashion because she is loyal to you and needs reassurance of your loyalty to her. You may have heard this old joke. A group of men were golfing one day and 4 of them were on the 18th tee, ready to tee off. Just then a funeral procession went by, and one of the men stood up straight, took off his hat, and put it over his heart. His golf buddies were stunned. Someone said, "We've never seen anyone ready to tee off and then stop to put his hat over his heart to honor a funeral procession. That's amazing." The man answered, "Yeah, she was a great woman. We were married 43 years. Play golf or attend your wife's funeral." Absurd, of course, and possibly funny to a group of men. But I guarantee that your wife will not think this joke is any funnier than being teased about being turned in for a new model. She is not built to appreciate that kind of humor. She is so constructed that she appreciates loyalty and commitment. Assuring her of that will keep you both on the energizing cycle. She is assured of your loyalty when you speak highly of her in front of others. You are involved in things important to her. You help her make decisions, such as ones regarding the children. You don't correct her in front of the children. You don't look lustfully at other women. You make her and your marriage a priority. You are never critical of her or your children in front of others. You include her in social gatherings when others may leave their spouse's home. You tell the kids, "Don't speak to your mother that way." You call and let her know your plans. You keep commitments. You speak positively of her and the children at all times. Chapter 14. Esteem. She wants you to honor and cherish her. Over the years, many men have come to me and said, "You know, Pastor, my prayer life isn't what it should be." I respond, "How are you treating your wife?" No, the husband hastens to explain. "My prayer life isn't where it ought to be." How are you treating your wife? No, Pastor, I'm saying my prayer life. I'm not talking about my wife. I smile and say, I am talking about your wife. In part 1, we talked about scriptural reasons that husbands are to value their wives as equals. The major passage we looked at was 1 Peter 3:7, which tells husbands to live in an understanding way with their wives, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. Tucked into 1 Peter 3:7 is one more phrase that every husband should heed. Peter adds that the reason the husband should treat his wife in an understanding way, as a fellow heir in Christ, is so that his prayers will not be hindered. That is why I would often tell men who came to see me for counsel that, if heaven seemed silent to their prayers, perhaps they were not honoring their wives as God intended. Ord looks with favor on those who are godly. His ears are open to their cry. Psalm 34:15 Nerve. These men were sure they were doing all the right things, walking in integrity, and serving the Lord, but when they prayed, the heavens seemed as brass. They kept wondering, "God, why aren't you hearing me?" And as we probed a little deeper, we often saw that the answer for these men was that they weren't living with their wives in an understanding way that honored and esteemed them. As soon as these men started obeying Scripture, their prayer life improved. The COUPLE principles are connected. In a very real sense, the COUPLE acronym is a commentary on the best way to show respect to a wife. The best way to respect or honor a wife is through your closeness, openness, understanding, peacemaking, loyalty, and now E, for esteem. A wife who is esteemed will not sing Aretha Franklin's refrain, RESPECT. Scripture speaks of how a man should esteem and cherish his beloved. How beautiful and how delightful you are, my love, with all your charms. Song of Solomon 7:6. A husband is to be one who cherishes his wife, Ephesians 5:29. In the well-known passage of Proverbs 31, verses 28-29 say, "Her children stand up and call her blessed. Her husband also rises up, and he praises her. He says, many women do noble things. But you are better than all the others, Nerve." God has made women so that they want to be esteemed, honored, and respected. The way to honor your wife, as well as to honor your covenant with God, is to treasure her. When I say your wife wants honor, respect, it is a different kind of honor from what you seek as a man. For her, respect is a part of love. Probably the only time you will ever hear her say, "You don't respect me," is when you dismiss her op and ion. Actually, her exact words might be, "I know you don't love me because you don't even respect me." Respect, honor, and esteem are not qualities in and of themselves for your wife, they are components of the love she wants from you. To put it another way, love has many parts, and we are looking at 6 of them here with the acronym COUPLE. In chapters 15 and following, we will talk about how a wife spells respect to her husband with the acronym CHAIRS. Something in his nature feels called to chair the relationship. He does not feel this in the sense of being superior. He simply feels responsible to protect her and to die for her. God has made husbands this way, and they feel this responsibility equally. The biblical view is that a wife does not feel called to die for her husband as he feels called to die for her. In Ephesians 5, the husband is the Christ figure. Christ died for the church. The wife is the church figure, and her husband is to die for her. Your wife does not want to chair the relationship, but she does want to be first in importance to you. This is what Peter means by, show her honor, 1 Peter 3:7. Your wife wants to know that you have her on your mind and heart first and foremost. This is what I mean by esteem. When it's there, your wife will feel treasured as if she's the most loved woman on earth. Also, she will want to respect you in a similar way that the church reverences Christ. Remember that your love motivates her respect, and her respect motivates your love. Our kids often made Sarah feel like a failure. On many occasions while our children were growing up, Sarah would get discouraged with her mothering role. When the kids got into trouble, caused trouble, or were just plain trouble, as kids can be, she felt inadequate, and that flowed into self-depreciation. She would say, I feel like such a failure. When our kids were very young, I used to ignore Sarah's complaints or play them down as, no big deal. But as our two sons and daughter got into the teenage years, I began understanding what Sarah wanted when she came to me to say she felt like a failure or that she was no good as a mom. She wanted reassurance that I believed in her and the course she was taking in her role as a mother. She just wanted to know if I had confidence in the decisions she was making or was I second-guessing her. I continually let her know that I valued her efforts and commitment and that I prized her and the part she played in my life as well as in the lives of the children. I knew I could not do her job, and I often told her so. The love and respect connection can help you have an enjoyable, healthy, meaningful marriage relationship. Life, however, will never be totally perfect. When Adam and Eve fell in the garden, sin became the universal problem for all of us. See Genesis 3, Romans 5:12-20. Tension, conflict, and problems will occur, and you must be prepared to deal with all of it. As the husband, you tie your self-image into who you are in the field, that is, in work, in accomplishments, in conquests. See chapter 16. Your wife, however, ties her self-worth into who she is in the family. Yes, it is true that today many women have careers and important positions outside of the home, but one woman who was the vice president of a major airline said it well, at the end of the day, all that's important is that I know he loves me and values me. That's what I want more than anything else. Use symbols to show your wife esteem. After getting out of military school and entering Wheaton College, I began asking, who are these people called women? I had been withdrawn from them in military school from age 13 to 18. I had a lot of questions that most guys weren't asking. I can recall being in the dining hall with a bunch of the guys and asking, why do you give a girl a rose after a fight? They all gave me a blank look, and finally one of them said, I don't know, it just works. Pass the bread. But I wouldn't give it up. I knew there was a symbolism here that I did not understand. Giving roses to a man typically doesn't cause him to tear up and need a handkerchief. Later, after meeting and marrying Sarah, I learned a lot more about the power of symbolism and how it conveys to a woman that you value her and love her. You will never be able to show her the amount of emotional openness and esteem that she really wants. No man could, but symbolic things can do a great deal to bridge the gap. I am talking particularly about anniversaries and birthdays. Women put great store in these occasions. Remember my magnificent goof by forgetting Sarah's birthday. Keep me close to yourself like the ring on your finger. Song of Solomon 8:6. Nerve. Women are the ones who have babies, and that's one reason that birthdays are a big deal to them. For 9 months she is asked, when is the due date? Birth is part of the culture of women. Only women give birth. As Jeremiah observed, ask now, and see, if a male can give birth. Jeremiah 30:6. In a woman's mind, who could possibly forget a birthday? She never would. Much the same way, a marriage date is etched in the woman's soul. Since childhood, your wife dreamed of the wedding day as she played dress up and sang, Here Comes the Bride. Even today, your wife will show wedding pictures to her friends. They will talk about her dress, her hairdo back then, etc. Husbands, however, never played dress up in tuxes. Husbands do not say, "Hey, Harry, let me show you what the guys wore in my wedding." This is a graphic illustration of pink and blue, and you should be aware of it. For your wife, there are no more important dates than your wedding anniversary and her birthday, as well as the birthdays of others in the family. All of these dates are opportunities for you to show her that you love and esteem her by remembering them and celebrating them with her. Does a young woman forget all about her jewelry? Does a bride forget her wedding jewels? Jeremiah 2:32 Nerve. How you celebrate her birthday or your anniversary is an art, not a science. The scientific approach puts a lot of stock in the material, the expensive. Suppose one man buys his wife a Mercedes for her birthday. I can think of 3 men I know who did just that. The other man takes his wife out to the park and they go for a nice walk and share feelings of love and closeness as he tells her how much she means to him. On the way back to the car, he finds a small, flat rock, picks it up, and brings it home. Then he writes a little poem or some other notation on it and presents it to her as a memento of the walk they took that day. Whose wife will appreciate her gift the most? The natural male blue inclination is to think that the expensive gift would be far more meaningful to a wife. After all, if you bought another man a Mercedes, he'd go around telling all of his friends, "Wow, what a great guy Joe is. I can't believe it. He gave me this wonderful car." But when you buy a woman a Mercedes, she is much more likely to say to her girlfriends, "Look, he got me a Mercedes. I wonder if he is trying to buy me off or something." Let's get back to that little rock. When she's 93 and you've been dead for a decade, what is she going to keep on her mantle? A picture of the Mercedes? Absolutely not. She's going to keep that rock, because it is symbolic of a time when her husband gave her special attention, devotion, and esteem. One husband attended our conference with his wife of 24 years and quickly grasped the power of little, thoughtful things. His wife wrote, "Valentine's Day was very unique. I woke up to a candy scavenger hunt. My husband had taken the time to write 4 short poems and attached each to a baggie filled with 4 different kinds of Valentine candy. It started in the bathroom, and had clues of where to find the next. I just giggled around the house, it was so fun. That night my husband made reservations to go to a Valentine supper. A classic guitarist played. They took our picture and put it in a special, thank you, frame from the restaurant. We feasted on wonderful food in a very relaxed atmosphere. It was absolutely one of the most memorable evenings. Thank you for encouraging my husband to love me." This woman's words illustrate a key truth. The expense of a gift is secondary to the thought your wife senses you put into the gift, card, or activity. God designed your wife to be touched by things that symbolize your love and show that you treasure her. She wants to know you think about her. She wants that to come from your heart without any prompting. Truly, it is the thought that counts. Does your wife ever want you to read her mind? The Valentine story above is what can happen when all goes well. Sometimes, however, Murphy's Law kicks in, at least a little bit. To illustrate, I'll stay with the theme of taking your wife out to dinner. Suppose it's your 5th anniversary and you come home and say, "Honey, I want to take you out for dinner for our anniversary. Where do you want to go?" She says, "Oh, I don't know." You respond, "No, I really want to take you wherever you want. Where would you like to go?" She says again, "I don't know, why don't you decide?" You want me to decide? Yes, I do. But I don't want to decide. I want to take you where you want to go. No, I want you to decide, your wife insists. Okay, you decide. Well, I just read that the Freeway Steakhouse has the best beef in town. Why don't we try it? And she says, "I don't want to go there." A lot of husbands, maybe most husbands, have been in situations similar to this. At this point you can go in one of 2 directions. You can process your wife's seemingly maddening response by getting irritated and even angry. Equipped to see and hear in blue, you can think that your wife should know she can't be so unreasonable, illogical, and provoking. If she wants to ruin the evening, she has both of you halfway to the crazy cycle already. But there is another choice. You can weight the scales in favor of the energizing cycle. You can remember that your wife sees and hears in pink. You can adjust your blue sunglasses and blue hearing aids and be patient. Instead of getting irritated, you seek a little more information. Now in truth, your wife really wants you to sort of read her mind. She is thinking, if he loved me as much as I love him, he'd figure out where I want to go without my having to tell him. That's what I do for him. Why can't he do that for me? I want to know he really thinks about me as I think about him and feels about me as I feel about him. Every husband has been expected to read his wife's mind. Though mind reading seldom is possible, there are ways to make good guesses. You can say, okay, the Freeway Steakhouse is pretty limited, just steak and ribs. How about? Quote. And then you name 2 or 3 other restaurants that have ambience and atmosphere, as well as a broader menu. Chances are you'll hit the jackpot with one of these and she'll say, okay, that sounds good. Your 5th anniversary is saved from disaster and, even more important, your wife feels that you hold her in high esteem, that you really treasure her and want her to be happy. There are other situations, however, where your wife doesn't want you to read her mind, but she still strongly disagrees with you. This can get a little sticky. How do you treat her with esteem if her opinion conflicts with yours or possibly even sounds a little wacky? Because males tend to be so bottom line, it would be easy to sound harsh without even realizing it. Actually, there are 3 ways you can answer a wife when you don't agree with her, and they can all keep her esteem intact. First, you can simply say, honey, thanks for sharing your opinion. Second, you might say, honey, let me think about that. That tells her you are processing her ideas. Third, and possibly best, you say, sweetheart, even though I don't feel the same way you do about this, I value your opinion and I trust your heart. Thank her for all she does. One other way to esteem your wife is to let her know you really appreciate all she does. You may have heard the story of the husband who came home from work to find bikes and scooters blocking the driveway, the house in shambles, dirty dishes stacked in the sink, dirty laundry piled up, pieces of clothing scattered everywhere, and his 2 preschool children drawing on the walls. He finally found his wife, asleep in bed. He woke her up and asked, honey, the place is a disaster, the kids are running wild, what is going on? She looked at him with a wan, tired smile. Well, you know how you always come home and you ask me what I did all day. He says, yeah. Quote. Well, today I didn't do it. Esteem your wife for what she does, but don't overlook cherishing her simply for who she is. One woman said to her husband, I just got off the phone with my sister. She's incredible. She tells me that she helped her husband build a back porch on their house this summer. Rejoice in the wife of your youth, Proverbs 5:18b. She also made a rocking chair, and she's in an exotic foods cooking class. She's always doing something, making something. I feel so inadequate when I talk with her. What do I make? Her husband turned to her and said, you make me happy. Bingo. Bonus points for that husband. He knows how to esteem his wife. Following are more ideas on how to esteem, cherish, and honor the most important person in your life. Your wife will feel esteemed when you say, I'm so proud of the way you handled that. You speak highly of her in front of others. You open the door for her. You try something new with her. You give her encouragement or praise with kindness and enthusiasm. You notice something different about her hair or clothes. You are physically affectionate with her in public. You teach the children to show her and others respect. You value her opinion in the gray areas is not wrong but just different, and valid. You choose family outings over guy things. You make her feel first in importance. You are proud of her in all she does. Chapter 15. CHAIRS, How to Spell Respect to Your Husband. Note to husbands. This chapter and the 6 to follow are for wives only, but husbands are invited to read along. Addies, we have taken your husbands through COUPLE to help them become more loving men. Now it's your turn. In the next 6 chapters, we will take you through the acronym CHAIRS to give you practical, biblical ways that will help you become more respectful women. Wives do not need a lot of coaching on being loving. It is something God built into them, and they do it naturally. However, they do need help with respect. Part 1 contained many letters from wives who discovered the tremendous power in giving their husbands unconditional respect. Admittedly, this is a foreign term to many women, and even though you have bought into the idea that your husband wants and needs respect, it is still a difficult concept to practice. A wise woman builds her house, but a foolish woman tears hers down. Proverbs 14:1 Nerve. This wife's letter represents how many women feel as they attempt to get off the crazy cycle and on the energizing cycle. Applying respect in my marriage is quite foreign and I have really had to work at it. I always thought I just needed to love more. What a revelation for me, because loving more wasn't helping. Thank you again. I am so excited about where our marriage will go from here as we apply what we have learned. I have a new energy for our relationship. Providing more energy for your marriage is exactly what the CHAIRS chapters are all about. CHAIRS is an acronym that stands for 6 major values that your husband holds: conquest, hierarchy, authority, insight, relationship, and sexuality. Each of these values will be covered in a brief chapter. In conquest, you will learn to appreciate his desire to work and achieve. Hierarchy deals with appreciating his desire to protect and provide. Authority covers appreciating his desire to serve and to lead. Insight touches on appreciating his desire to analyze and counsel. Relationship helps you understand his desire for shoulder-to-shoulder friendship. Sexuality explains his desire for sexual intimacy. In these 6 areas, you will learn how to spell respect to your husband. For how to share your needs with each other, see Appendix C. Granted, unconditional respect almost sounds to some women like an oxymoron. After all, he should earn respect, not be given respect unconditionally, or so many women seem to think. Ever since I have started teaching the love and respect connection, I have struggled with helping wives see what unconditional respect can do for their husbands and their marriages. Giving your husband unconditional respect is the clear path to receiving unconditional love from him, but it is still hard for women to grasp. Here are reports from 2 wives who are reaping the benefits. When a wife is clothed with dignity, she carries herself honorably and comes across respectfully. Proverbs 31:25 Niv. I kept trying to get some attention and affection. One night a few weeks ago, he said to me for the 100th time, "You never listened to me," is an explanation for that month's ice-cold treatment. That night I re-listened to your man talk and I finally understood what he meant. What he was getting was a whole lot of badgering in my attempt to get closer to him. I immediately changed my approach and got very conscious of my choices and outcomes, and the result has been wonderful. He has been very loving. I am thankful for this concept of unconditional respect, because now I feel I can return, in a way that is meaningful to him, all the love he gives to me. As a martial artist, I have learned a lot about respect, just didn't realize it was a language. I never knew it was a need, let alone a language. I am learning to communicate more effectively with my teenage son as well, thanks to this new awareness of respect. How to use the respect test with your husband. When I began teaching the love and respect connection, I would talk to various groups and quote them the key passages. Ephesians 5:33, the wife must respect her husband. Niv. In 1 Peter 3:1-2, wives, be submissive to your own husbands, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. But, frankly, many women would dismiss these verses almost flippantly by pointing out that Paul was a male and so was Peter. How could they know how a woman felt? Instead of preaching sermons about not rebelling against inspired scripture, I devised a way they could test the concept of unconditional respect with their husbands. Not surprisingly, I called it the respect test. I asked a group of wives to spend a bit of time thinking of some things they respected about their husbands. It took some of them quite a while, but they all finally did it. Then I told them to go home, wait until their husbands weren't busy or distracted, and say, "I was thinking about you today and several things about you that I respect, and I just want you to know that I respect you." After saying this, they were to not wait for any response, just mention something they needed to do and quietly start to leave the room. Then they were to see what would happen. One woman reported back to me that after telling her husband she respected him, she turned to leave but she never even made it to the door. He practically screamed, "Wait. Come back." What things? Fortunately, and this is very important, she was ready to tell him what she respected about him and she proceeded to do so. After she was finished, he said, "Wow. Hey, can I take the family out to dinner?" The wife was aghast. Her husband had seldom if ever taken the family out to dinner. What was going on here? I explained to her that a man's first and fundamental impulse is to serve, especially in response to being honored. She had honored him, and he wanted to do something about it. The wife had to ask for a rain check because the kids had commitments that evening, and he agreed. About 15 minutes later, however, she heard pots and pans banging in the kitchen. She went to look and found her husband fixing dinner. Her husband had never fixed dinner. Never, this was a first. Again, he was serving. When doing the respect test, you walk by faith, not by sight. 2 Corinthians 5:7. A few days later, this wife wrote to us again and said, "You won't believe it. He's in the laundry room. Do you have any other respect tests? I think I might get a cruise out of this." Could a wife use the respect test to manipulate her husband to take her on a cruise? That's possible, but this wife was not guilty of manipulation. She sincerely tried expressing respect for her husband, and it worked far beyond her expectations. To repeat what I said earlier, a husband who has basic goodwill will serve his wife when she respects him for who he is. I am convinced that the key to motivating another person is meeting his or her deepest need. Granted, not every wife may get the same response that this woman received. Some husbands might mull over the respect test for a while and say something later. Or they might say nothing at all. The point is, using the respect test means taking a step of faith. It is admitting that you understand what God's word says about unconditional respect for your husband. You show him respect regardless of his response. Be ready with reasons that you respect him. When a wife tells her husband that there are several things that she respects about him, most husbands, after regaining consciousness, will instantly ask, "What were you thinking? What do you mean? What do you respect about me?" A wife needs to be prepared to answer these questions honestly and genuinely. Don't expect to make your respect statement, head for the hills, and hope he never mentions it again. Trust me, that won't happen. But what if a wife just doesn't know what to say? We have talked with many wives who admit there just isn't anything they really respect about their husbands. But a wife who says this is usually too angry or perhaps too discouraged to think about what she can respect in her husband. First, this kind of wife must ask herself, is my husband, as unaware and unloving as he is, a man of basic goodwill? If the answer to this question is yes in any degree at all, then this wife can start making her list. It will help her to realize that her husband is made in the image of God, and he has God-given attributes that are worthy of respect. For example, he desires to work and achieve and to protect and provide for this family. He desires to be strong and to lead in the good sense of the word. We'll look at these and other God-given male attributes in following chapters. The point is this: look at his desires and not his performance. Here are some thoughts to get you started. You can frame them in your own particular words. Honey, I respect how you get up every day and go to work to provide for our family. This isn't an option, you have to do it and you do. Honey, I respect you for your desire to protect me and provide for me and the family. I think of all the insurance you have for us. I know the bills weigh on you at times, and I admire you for your commitment. The key is to focus on the positive instead of always going back to the negative. A wife must try to see what God sees. Is your husband basically a man of goodwill? Get in touch with that fact and express respect for it. A scripture passage I often reference regarding goodwill in marriage is 1 Corinthians 7:33-34. Paul assumes that married couples in Corinth have goodwill toward each other. He points out that an unmarried man has more time for doing the Lord's work but that a married man is concerned about how he may please his wife. v. 33. Paul goes on to say that it is the same for a wife who is concerned about how she may please her husband. v. 34.1. A good-willed husband does not try to displease his wife but to please her, as Paul clearly states in 1 Corinthians 7:33. I always urge a wife who is feeling unloved to be slow in asserting that her husband is unloving or does not want to love her. That is impugning an evil motive upon her husband, which is too drastic a judgment. True, a husband may not be as loving as he ought to be, but he is not consciously, willfully, and habitually trying to be unloving and displeasing. During those moments when a husband displeases a wife or a wife displeases her husband, it helps to keep certain scriptures in mind. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Matthew 26:41. And, indeed, there is not a righteous man or woman on earth who continually does good and who never sins. Ecclesiastes 7:20, italics mine. Point 2. When a husband gets angry or stubborn, his wife must realize he is not set on a course to hurt her. He tries to be well-meaning. He wants a happy marriage. And because he wants that happy marriage, wives who try the respect test can be amazed at what will happen. Men are starving for respect. One wife who attended one of our conferences wrote to me and reported what happened when she used the respect test. Instead of talking to him, she typed up a card that told her husband how much she respected him for working so hard to provide for the family and letting her be a stay-at-home mom for their 3 daughters. She tucked it in his briefcase, and wife found it the next day by mid-morning. Immediately, he called her on his cell phone and thanked her for making his whole day. When a wife wisely applies respect, she is a wise wife, given by the Lord. Proverbs 19:14. Nerve. I could give you many other reports from wives who tried the respect test and passed with flying colors. Some have done it face to face, others have written notes, and others have called their husband at work and left a respect message on his voicemail. It doesn't matter how a wife uses the respect test, but when she does, it can be the first step toward a real breakthrough in the marriage. One wife wrote, "Just a few days ago, I decided to tell my husband that I respect him. It felt so awkward to say the words, but I went for it and the reaction was unbelievable. He asked me why I respected him. I listed off a few things, although I could have said many more, and I watched his demeanor change right before my very eyes." If your relationship has been unfulfilling, try to think back to the point where it lost its intimacy. You may remember feeling wounded in spirit because you did not feel your husband loved you in a meaningful way, and you reacted. Ever since, the crazy cycle has spun for you to one degree or another. This wife admitted, "We've been living in the crazy cycle for more years than you can imagine. I've already respected him, I just wasn't showing it because I felt so unloved. I guess it was my way of retaliating, but I honestly didn't know it. As I started really looking at him during some interactions, I was shocked at the look on his face. I saw that he felt disrespected. How could I never see it before? The best way I can describe what I see happening now is that he is melting, and I feel hope for the first time in years." This wife found the way off the crazy cycle. The following chapters are designed to help you start practicing respect for your husband in ways that will energize him in your marriage. The word chairs describes the typical man. Yes, I know there are exceptions, but men, in general, see themselves as the ones who should chair the relationship. That may not be politically correct, but we're not here to discuss political correctness. We're here to discuss the way things are, the way men and women feel in their souls. We've looked at how women feel in their souls, and now we must consider how men feel. Neither is wrong, they're just as different as pink and blue. A husband wants to be seen as one who manages his own household well, 1 Timothy 3:4. In most cases, men see themselves in the driver's seat. Whether they are any good at chairing the relationship and being in the driver's seat can be debated. But in terms of a man's self-image, he needs to be the chairman, he needs to drive. He needs to be first among equals, not to be superior or dominating, but because this is how God has made him and he wants to take on that responsibility. Keep this vital fact in mind as you read through the 6 concepts that follow, which will explain how to spell respect to a man and get you both on the energizing cycle. As these concepts unfold, you will get a clearer picture of who your husband is and how God has made him, and your son if you have one. And, as you practice these concepts, you may well enjoy what many wives have experienced. For example, we have never had a marriage that was close and intimate and loving until I began practicing respect. I always knew that something was lacking, but figured it was him being unloving and not me being disrespectful. Now I feel loved and I know he feels respected, and a tremendous void has been filled in our lives. Your comment was that it is easier for men to respect their wives than to love them, and easier for wives to love their husbands than to respect them. I have never come across that thought, ever before. It was really striking to me. This was really, really important. My husband and I are enjoying such a sweeter relationship these days. I have learned to be keenly aware of what I am communicating, including facial expressions and tone of voice, and my husband has responded by allowing me to tell him when I am feeling unloved. We have avoided the crazy cycle completely since I committed to be obedient to God in this. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Those are just a few of dozens of such comments that we have received. As Dale Carnegie once said, truly respecting others is the bedrock of motivation. It is also the key to getting off the crazy cycle and on the energizing cycle. Read on and learn specific ways to motivate your husband to love you as never before. Chapter 16. Conquest. Appreciate his desire to work and achieve. As we begin to unpack the acronym CHAIRS, our first letter is C, standing for conquest. Because I am talking primarily to wives, many of you may be wondering why I picked such an unromantic word. Conquest sounds like something out of the dark ages of chauvinism when men believed it was their right to conquer women, physically, sexually, mentally, and emotionally. That kind of conquest is not at all what I have in mind. By conquest, I mean the natural, inborn desire of the man to go out and conquer the challenges of his world, to work and achieve. As a wife, if you can start to understand how important your husband's work is to him, you will take a giant step toward communicating respect and honor, two things that he values even more than your love. That a husband values respect more than love is very difficult for many women to grasp. God has made you to love, and you see life through pink lenses that are focused on love. You give love, you want love, and you may not quite understand why your husband does not operate the same way. When I say a husband values respect more than love, do I mean that your husband does not value love at all? Of course he values your love, more than words can describe, but he spells love RESPECT. Let's create a scene that might illustrate how a man feels about conquest. Suppose a husband has just lost his job. He comes home and tells his wife. He looks shattered, dazed, defeated. To help her husband, the wife says, "It doesn't matter. All that matters is that we love one another." Does this seem to help? He looks at her blankly, shrugs, and plunks down in front of the TV. For the rest of the evening he is withdrawn, not wanting to talk. His wife is baffled. She tried to comfort him, and now he has withdrawn from her. Actually, the answer is quite simple. Think and Blue are at it again. Think tried to comfort, Blue was offended by her overtures. To help you understand, let's create another scene where the wife has a miscarriage. Her husband comes to her and says, "Honey, it doesn't matter as long as we love one another." Some women might say I'm talking about apples and oranges. How can I compare losing a job to losing a baby? I'm not arguing the value of what is lost here, I'm explaining how important your husband's job is to him. In his eyes, he has lost something that is extremely important, it is part of the very warp and woof of his being. This is why, in all likelihood, if you try to comfort your husband after he loses his job by saying, "It's okay, honey, we have each other," it may not help much. He knows he has you. He is secure in your love, but he also identifies strongly with the fact that he is someone who works, who has a position, who has responsibilities. Where did he get this deep-seated feeling about his work? From the start, Adam enjoyed his work. To learn where husbands got this tremendous drive to work and achieve, we must go back to Genesis and the first career assignment in history. Then the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate it and keep it, Genesis 2:15. Before Eve was created, God made Adam, and God made him to work. It's interesting to note that Eden was not a place with free handouts wherever Adam turned. The trees provided food, but Adam was to cultivate and keep them. God set Adam up with almost everything he needed, a beautiful place, plenty of food, and a good water supply, see Genesis 2:10.1. With a great job and perfect working conditions, Adam seemed to have it all. But the Lord knew something was missing. To fulfill his vocation, his call, Adam needed a woman to be his counterpart. So God made a helper suitable for him, Genesis 2:18. The Hebrew word for helper, or helpmeet, means literally, a help answering to him, or one who answers. In 1 Corinthians 11:9, Paul takes this thought further, "For indeed man was not created for the woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake." My observation is that during courtship a woman glows with a message to her man, "I love you and am here for you. I respect what you want to do and who you want to be. I long to help you." That's what love is all about. After marriage, however, things change. Her way of helping can feel anything but respectful to her husband. For example, one wife of almost 16 years and a homeschooling mother of 3, Thought she had the right motives to be a helpmeet, but she could see she wasn't being received as such. She writes, "He received what I thought were well-meaning ways of helping as intentions with wrong motives. I am finding out I have come across in a complaining negative attitude more than I care to realize. Since I have been purposing to show respect, I have definitely seen the blessing. My husband has been talking more to me, been more affectionate, and I feel like we have been closer in the past few weeks than we have in years." Obviously, passages like Genesis 2:18 and 1 Corinthians 11:9 are not favorites with the feminist movement. Point 2. To feminists this is politically incorrect, something written by a man, making God to appear to be sexist. But Scripture is not so easily dismissed. From the very beginning, man was called upon to work in the field, and to provide for his family. The male feels a deep need to be involved in adventure and conquest. This is not an option for him, it is a deep-seated trait. From Jacob's day until now, a man asks, "When shall I provide for my own household?" Genesis 30:30. A man's first question, "What do you do?" Quote, "The first question a man usually asks another man when they meet for the first time is, 'What do you do?' Right or wrong, most men identify themselves by their work. God created men to do something in the field. Watch young boys as they pick up sticks and turn them into imaginary guns or tools. Recently a mother told us she had prevented her son from having any toy guns or using sticks as pretend rifles, but when he made his cheese sandwich into the form of a pistol and was shooting at a friend, she cried out in exasperation, 'I give up.' Mothers should never give up because this is simply part of a boy's nature. He is called to be a hunter, a worker, a doer. He wants to make his conquest in the field of life. The academic term for this is the instrumentality of the male. 3. From childhood, there is something in a male that makes him like adventure and conquest. He wants to go into the field to hunt or to work in some way. During a Love and Respect conference, when we talk about this male drive for conquest that starts very young, I ask the wives, "How do you want your future daughter-in-law to treat your son? He's going to have this same need to achieve and to work. I'm sure that you will want his wife to support him, just as your husband wants you to support him." When I mention their sons and what might happen when they marry, the light goes on for many women who are struggling with the concept of unconditional respect. One wife told me, "When you put it this way, it changes the whole focus. I feel differently about how I treat my husband than how I want my son treated by his future wife. That shouldn't be." How deeply men value their inborn desire to work and achieve is graphically illustrated in two friends of mine who faced the threat of cancer. Both men calmly faced death and accepted what they thought would be their end. Through all the chemotherapy and accompanying problems, their optimism and faith remained strong. In the end, both men survived, but both still suffered terribly from a common foe. One of the men chose to sell his company to allow himself to serve God with whatever time he had left. However, for a period of time after the sale, he found he did not know who he was without his work. He told me, "I was never depressed when dealing with cancer and possibly dying, but when I left my work, which was my identity, I went into a depression that was like nothing I had ever experienced before." The other man suffered horribly and was at death's door, but somehow he, too, recovered. He returned to work, and life was wonderful, but then he lost his job. He came to see me, depressed and defeated. He told me that being out of work was harder than dying. Ironically, both of these men were more deeply affected by losing their careers than they were with facing death due to cancer. Many women have no idea of the importance men put on their work. If a wife even implies, unknowingly, that her husband's work is not that important, she has just called him a loser. I can recall a friend of mine who built a very profitable business and was then approached by someone who wanted to buy him out. In his mind, there was no greater compliment because this buyout meant he would be financially secure and socially honored. To him, this meant success. The buyout finally happened, and he came home to announce the good news to his wife. She, however, was preoccupied with home and family issues. Distracted, she said, "That's nice, dear," and then went on accomplishing one of her to-do list items. This man told me later that he was crushed. He said, "I was so hurt I made a decision never to share things with her again." I don't endorse his decision, but I can empathize. A woman would probably be able to empathize if she could picture a reverse situation. She announces she is pregnant and her husband, distracted by his television program, says, "That's nice, dear." By way of stark contrast, here is a letter from a wife who chose to stand by her man. "My husband has been going through a big struggle and has been the target of a lot of criticism and rumor. I have chosen to stand next to him and show respect and commitment in the face of the criticism and rumors. He and I have lost friendships spanning 15 to 30 years because of this struggle but have grown closer in the process. He tells me what's going on now, shares the emails with me, etc., instead of being all closed up and quiet. God is so good to me, giving me the knowledge I need at the time I need it." Do women want to have it all? When I speak of a man's deep-seated desire to work, I am not saying women have no desire to work. Women have always worked, but generally they did so in the home with children nearby. In recent decades, women have discovered they are quite capable of going out into the workaday world and holding significant positions and making tremendous achievements. But when a wife goes out to work, the question remains, who will remain at home to care for the kids? The answer is daycare, a solution that at best is hardly ideal and, at worst, is severely harmful to the children. It is interesting that in the Western world at least, women see careers as a freedom of choice issue. Women don't want to be told they have to work. They want the freedom to choose full-time mothering and/or a career. Most men feel that work is not an option. Comedian Tim Allen has observed that women have all kinds of choices. Men have one: work or go to jail. Yes, it is true that in some homes the woman works and the man takes care of the kids. Generally speaking, however, our sons will feel they have to work in some field, but our daughters will want the freedom to choose between pregnancies and promotions. My counseling experience leads me to conclude that the typical woman is looking for a husband who is capable enough to enable her to leave the workforce if she so desires. As she evaluates her future with a man, she instinctively considers his ability to take care of her and the children. The good-willed woman marries for love, not for money. Nonetheless, she is very aware of the need to make a nest. She asks herself, can he provide sufficiently to make it possible for me to stay home with my little chicks if that's what I want to do full-time? The woman who asks this question is being wise. I hope my daughter weighs her options in this way. There is also the question of just how much a wife who is the main breadwinner enjoys her role. Remember the basic question that all wives have: does he love me as much as I love him? Women are basically insecure about this, and if a wife is out there doing the providing, bringing home the money while he stays home, her insecurity goes up, not down. She wonders, would he even be here if it weren't for the money I make? Becoming the main provider for the family can result in the woman being attacked at her level of deepest fear. A man always feels the call to the field, while the natural instinct of a woman is the call to the family. The husband instinctively knows he needs to be out there performing, no matter what other pressures he may be facing. I believe that most men reflect Adam and most women reflect Eve deep within their core. Like Adam, he feels a call to work in the field on behalf of the family. Most women feel like Eve. She alone can have a baby and, if she has a baby, she wants the option of having her Adam work in the field on her behalf. Adam does not expect Eve to have a baby and hand the baby to him so she can go back to work. Those who advocate domestic equality promote this idea, but after doing my PhD dissertation on effective fathers, I would not agree. This is not to downplay a woman's abilities and her desire for a career. Women can be called to positions of important leadership, see Judges 4, but I want to emphasize her incomparable worth as mother to an infant. A father with an infant does not compare to a mother with an infant. I do not believe any social engineering will make daddy a natural mother. Typically, the woman leans toward having the baby and caring for the baby, the man leans toward working in the field for her and the baby. Yes, I know there are exceptions in today's culture, but for the typical woman, her first desire is not for a career, it is for home and family. Point 4. Despite feminism's cries, a wife best qualifies as the one who tenderly cares for her own children. 1 Thessalonians 2:7. Have you ever said, "Thanks for working"? For those women who would like to do one simple thing that would encourage their husbands and show them respect concerning this whole area of conquest, just try writing him a note. It doesn't have to be long or profound. All it has to say is, "Honey, thank you for getting out there and working." If you want to elaborate, Tell him that you are grateful that he has given you the opportunity to choose to go out and work or to be home with the children, and you just want to thank him for that. I talk to women who tell me that they thought about thanking their husbands for working. In fact, they've thought a lot about it but have never told them. I ask them how they would feel about a man who says he thinks a lot about how much he loves his wife but never tells her. The usual response is shock or anger. What do you mean, a man could live with his wife and never tell her he loves her? They can't believe it. The point is easily made. Relationships go both ways. Of course, he should tell you he loves you. But you should turn to him and say, honey, thank you. You have to get out there and work every day. I don't know if I totally understand it, but I appreciate this. I really respect you. Watch what your husband does with that. See how he reacts. I guarantee you it will make a tremendous difference. Also see Appendix A and C. He wants a woman who believes in him. In one of my Christian education classes in college, the question was asked, what do you want in a spouse? I remember saying, I want a woman who will believe in me. There is a parallel here between Christ and the church. Christ wants us to believe in him, and we do that to the glory of God. But in the human sense, in the marriage relationship, men do what they do for the admiration of one woman. When you fell in love and he married you, he felt that you believed in him and he appreciated that, perhaps far more than you have ever realized. It touched his spirit, because this is something huge within the male. He married you, and he thought that your cheerleading would last forever. But years later, his work appears to compete with the marriage and the family. Instead of admiring him for his work efforts, you may be feeling neglected. A wife of noble character is her husband's crown, Proverbs 12:4 It's possible your husband may be in the workaholic category and you have every reason to feel neglected. You may be tempted to feel like one wife who wrote to us to say, I have come out and said in the past that his work is more important than I am and that it's all about him. I have said that his laptop is the other woman in our house and I can't compete with it. Workaholism is a very real and serious problem, but I believe that if you and your husband are trying to be a love and respect couple, what he needs is support and respect for his work efforts. If he is a good-willed man who is neglecting the family by working too much, he will realize it, and you can talk it through and work it out. For more on workaholism, see Appendix E, p. 315. When you support and appreciate your husband, he will say that he has received favor from the Lord, Proverbs 18:22 Nerve. Your first job is to be sure that you support his efforts for conquest, to get out there to work and achieve. Never let him feel unappreciated and that he's just a meal ticket. Always be aware that, because of your pink sunglasses and pink hearing aids, the messages you send can misrepresent you. His blue sunglasses and blue hearing aids can decode you all wrong, and he mistakenly feels that you see him as just your bread and butter. That is why it is so important that you thank him and let him know you admire and support him. If you say those words, it will do a lot to help his blue hearing aids pick up the right message, and your support of his work efforts will motivate his love for you. One wife's brief note says it all. One day I put a note in his lunchbox, thanking him for some things. He told me thanks that night, and on Valentine's Day I wrote another note about his dedication to his job and family and how I appreciated that. I could tell by the look in his eyes it meant a lot. Your husband will feel you appreciate his desire to work and achieve when